Angus here with Iron Bow Fly Shop. Today we're going to be tying up an Avalon Permit fly. This pattern was designed in Cuba. After a few years of research and tweaking the pattern, I finally settled on this, which is quite larger than your average permit fly. So we're going to start by tying this on a Daiichi 2546. And today we're going to be using a size 2. Get our hook and our vise here. So for thread we're going to be using UTC 140 in cream. I'm just going to start my thread behind the eye of the hook. And we're ready to tie in our brass eyes. So today we're going to be using large in nickel. So I'm going to go about 1 eye length from the eye of the hook. And I'm just going to get some good secure wraps. Do a couple figure eights. We're going to take our thread all the way back to about the midpoint between the barb and the point of our hook. So now that we've got that on there, we're going to be tying in our black crystal flash. So I'm going to take 2 strands here. I'm actually going to double them over. And we're going to leave these as long as we can for now, and at the end we're going to give them a trim. So now that we've got our flash tied in, we're going to be tying in our loco legs, and we're going to be using orange shrimp. You can use orange barred, tan barred. So we're going to grab 1 strand, double it over our thread. And again, we're going to leave these as long as we can for now, and we'll give them a little haircut at the end here. So next we're going to be tying in our Arctic fox. We're only going to use a small amount. If you don't have Arctic fox, you can also use like McFlylon or like an orange synthetic. But for a more natural look, I like to use the Arctic fox. So we're just going to grab a small clump here. And when I tie it in, usually what I'll do is actually leave the butt ends as long as I can. So when I wrap the thread around the shank of the hook, it'll actually give a little bit thicker of a profile. So now that we've got it tied in, I'm going to trim it just behind the bend of our hook. Peel away any excess material. So next we're ready to tie in our keel. So I'm going to be using the SA Absolute Hard Mono, a 25 pound. Just going to cut off about a 4-inch piece. We're going to have a little bit of excess. So I'm just going to tie this in behind the eye, keeping it on top of our hook shank. And get that on as tight as I can. Now we're ready to tie in our flat diamond braid. Today we're going to be using pearl. And I'm only going to want about a 2-inch piece, so I'm going to tie this in just behind the eye again. So we're going to do 1 piece on each side of the hook shank. So when we actually tie this in at the end, both will be peeled over top of the hook shank. So get that on nice and secure. And now we're going to be tying in our marabou. Today we're going to be using tan. We're going to select a nice fine tip, some longer fibers. So again, we're going to tie this in just behind the eye. Just going to catch those tips. I'm actually going to grab my hackle plier. I'm actually going to grab the stem. I'm just going to give it a little twist. It just helps as you palmer that feather, just to keep everything nice and tight. So we're going to work that forward here, trim off any excess feathers. So this is a part that I like to do. Rather than tie the rabbit behind the eye, I'll actually tie it in front. I find when it swims, it gives it a little more natural profile. So we're going to tie in the flat diamond braid just in front of our eye. And we're just going to trim off the excess here, which I'll probably end up saving and using for tails on a Gotcha or Crazy Charlie. So now we're going to be tying in our claws. So we're just going to be using Hareline Rabbit in a light brown. So when I tie these in, I'm still going to want to keep that same delta wing profile. So I'm going to kind of want to tie it on the side of the shank. And we're going to do that on both sides. And I'm going to throw in a quick whip finish here. Cut off our thread. Now we're going to be switching to UTC 140 in fluorescent orange. So now that we've got our new thread secured, we're ready to tie in our beads. So the beads are actually going to slide onto the piece of mono that we've tied in. And we're going to use about 4 beads. So when tying it down, I like to get it as tight as I can to begin with a couple wraps. Then you can actually adjust the length in the mono. If it's too long, you can adjust it. If it's too short, I like to leave about 2 to 3 bead sizes in between the body of the fly and the keel. So we're going to trim off our mono here. And it's about the length I want it here. So now that we've got everything tied in, I'm just going to throw in a quick whip finish here. And for this I'll usually do 2. Just makes the fly a bit more durable. So now that we've got our whip finish in, just pull tight, trim off our excess. So another trick that I learned was if you grab a lighter, you can kind of catch some of the loose fibers that get caught in the head. Just really helps clean up flies. Whenever you're tying naturals, I try and do this. So now that we've got a little bit cleaner of a fly, and now that I'm happy with it, I'll come in with some UV resin. Just going to use the Loon and Flow. Just going to coat the head. It just adds a nice hot spot to the fly. Zap it with my UV light, which the Loon Infinity light does a great job. Hands down one of my favorite lights I've used. So now that everything's tied in, I'm going to trim my legs, and I don't want to cut too much off of them. I usually cut them at about 7 centimeters from the eye of the hook, and my crystal flash I'll cut to 9, so the entire fly is 9 centimeters. And there you have it. That is a finished Avalon Permit fly.